So this is the project. It's actually a pediment above a doorway, but it's a Queen Anne bonnet top style scroll board and gooseneck molding. Some people call it swanneck molding. Okay, this is a previous piece that I made from mahogany, and it has everything's hand carved. The current piece is going to be a Queen Anne style highboy bonnet top with gooseneck molding and scroll board, but it's just a pediment above the door frame, so there's not going to be any lowercase construction. I kind of chose my woodworking moniker on a whim. I didn't think about it too much. I do find it, these quirky behavior woodworkers to use monikers is amusing. Some of the people that I follow include Stumpy Nubs, but his moniker is a little too pessimistic for me. Follow the Wood Whisperer, but the wood in my shop doesn't budge with a whisper. It does start to pay attention to heavy clanging machinery with a poorly sharpened blade. There's also a samurai woodworker I follow, but I just can't find any application for the samurai sword in my shop. I would rate this project in the medium range of difficulty. I've tailored this project to somebody who doesn't like to use hand tools and prefers power tools. True craftsman like Matt Cremona, he makes a good video where he does some of the handwork using gooseneck mold or scrapers, etc., and that's an excellent video for similar type project. Maybe not quite as much detail as this one. Anyway, I hope you can learn from my mistakes. That will save you time. One of my sayings in life is you only have so many minutes in your life. Another one is only make the same mistake once, or only make the mistake once, try not to repeat it. I did drop my scroll board during this when I was trying to get it up on the bandsaw table, and it fell and cracked in half. Anyway, please excuse me if I misstate and say joiner instead of planer, or scroll saw instead of bandsaw. It was all shot original clips, very short, 1 to 3 minutes, then added together. The project I'm going to make is out of maple, and it's stained with the Bombay Mahogany Minwax Polyshades stain, which I don't recommend. The project you're looking at right now is just Danish oil on mahogany with some polyurethane top coats, and that would be much preferable to the stain I used, but I use that stain to match a fireplace which is in one big open room with the doorway pediment. Project, it's actually a pediment above a doorway, but it's a Queen Anne bonnet top style scroll board and gooseneck molding. Some people call it swanneck molding. Good morning. This morning I'm trying to design the scroll board for the pediment. This is a 1/2 inch piece of, I guess, MDF that you got at the big box stores. This is a cut-off piece I'm going to use to draw the curve. It just was laying around the shop. Pretty flexible piece. I tried a paint can initially here, but it didn't quite give me the size of the circle I needed, so now I'm describing or drawing a circle here with about a 4-inch diameter for the plan that I'm going to use, but it's pretty flexible. I think, you know, I've just kind of put the pieces up, that these appliques that I'd already bought ahead of time, and I'm going to kind of design off of that. And I don't think it has to be perfect. I've seen these drawn as ovals instead of circles, and I really liked them. So I did kind of an oval on a pediment before that was different and broke the mold, and that's kind of good too. So, you know, I just kind of draw it ahead of time, get an idea, look at it, and change it if you don't like it. Here I'm still trying to lay out the scroll board, the scroll board. I found this piece was a little bit too small for my liking when I held it up, so I ordered a piece online through one of the big box stores, actually an applique that's about 9 1/4 long by 3 7/8 across. You kind of laid out a circle, kind of measured to the end of the scroll board. It has to be flat. This very last portion has to be straight. You can curve down into it, but it's got to straighten out in order to be able to clamp it on the miter saw for later when you cut that, when you try to miter that end. So it actually has to have a little straight portion there at the end for clamping and cutting the miter. So these are my pieces. This is what I'm using to draw my circle, because again the paint can was a little too small, so I went up it's a 4-inch diameter, but this is just for my piece. It's for above a doorway. If you're using this for a piece of furniture, it's going to be a smaller circle, and you might be able to find something online and print it off. This is from a previous project where I'd use this piece of paper, but again, that's too small for my project, so I'm making my own. And you can kind of make your design how you want. The curve layout, it can curve at different angles. It doesn't have to be a real steep slope like I've seen on top of some of the clocks. It can be a gradual slope, kind of what's pleasing to your own eye or your client's eye. I guess you could set up some scroll boards if you're doing this professionally. I tried this thing for bending my curves, but it's not working out for me very well. So I'm just going to use a piece of wood here, and I'll show that in a little bit. Okay, I'm getting ready to draw my curve for the scroll board. And all I did was I clamped the board on the end there, clamped one on the end there, pushed a little weight up against it. Did some lines right here on I know how wide my trim's going to be, which is about 1 3/4. Just slightly under that, just a hair under that for 2 lines. I'm not going to go all the way to here. But the setup, I just used a block here, a piece of wood clamp there, a weight there, a piece of, it's just something to get it kind of close to curve, and then I can always straighten it out later or change it a little bit. I'll see how it looks. So here I just drew the curve. I really didn't need the weights with the 2 sticks clamped there. And just holding my finger on top of the little piece of flexible wood there, I was able to draw the curve for the scroll board. And again, I'm not going to fret it too much. If I don't like it, it's just a piece of MDF. Probably should have used a piece of paper. This is a piece of cutoff I had from a shelf I'd drawn on the pilaster top earlier that was just hanging around the shop. Too thin. I guess you don't want it overly thin, but you don't want it too thick. You could use anything really to kind of bend around there. So now that I've got it down to the end here, I'm going to carry it out a little bit further along the end so I can have some extra board for returns and things. So anyway, that's just, there's probably a lot better ways to do it than the way I did it, but I just bent a little piece of wood and clamped a few boards on there and held it down with my finger and drew with the other hand. This is a rosette part I'm going to be working on next from a previous project that I'd made. What I'm working on next is the rosette, which I've actually probably doing it the wrong way, but I actually cut it out after the fact from the gooseneck molding with the Forstner bit, which was successful previously. And in order to do that, though, I already had a piece here that I pleat so I don't have to carve, and I'm going to put it on the end of this round block and then chop this down and make it shorter. In the meantime, this arrived in the mail, ordered it from a big box store. My previous pediment was a little small. This one's a little bit oversized. It's about 3 7/8 by 9 1/4 inches. Right now I had to find the center of this because I'm getting ready to put it back on the lathe. This was an old piece I had laying around that I'd turned before, and I'm going to have to turn it a little bit smaller. So I used my center finder and drew a bunch of lines so I can get it back on the lathe and make it a little bit smaller so it'll fit with this Forstner bit, extra large Forstner bit I'm going to use to cut through the gooseneck molding eventually. Also, it was a little bit, this blank that it was already turned was a little bit big for the rosette. You can just see a little bit of end grain through it, so I'm going to make it a little bit smaller. So I'm getting ready to punch a hole in the end of the center of the, so that I'll be able to find it easier on the lathe. So I'm going to punch this hole. You don't have to do a rosette. You could just do return on your gooseneck molding and just dead end it. Usually seems like it's about halfway up, but pieces I've seen vary on how far over the rosette. Some go on the down slope, some right midway. Mine's going to be about midway because I'm getting a little crowded getting close to the finial. Okay, I've turned the eventual rosette to about the right size. If you fit it into the little Forstner bit hole I'd made, it fits pretty good. It's a little bit small when I sanded it, but it's good enough. On the bottom I've drawn some lines on the corners here so I can get the halfway point. I used the center finder. And I'm using these to line up a line I made from the edge of the board here, using that for a square. Drew a line about halfway up, dividing my rosette in half. Again, you can put the rosette over further however you want. So I'm going to take this and put my marks, which is right there on one side, and put it on the other side, and probably move it up a little bit. Give me a little piece of gooseneck molding at the very top there, and I'm going to mark that off. I changed my design again. The piece I ordered in the mail was just too big, I thought, so I found an old piece here laying around the shop, and I may use that. I have to make a decision soon. That's the problem with ordering online things. I figure this piece cost me about 46 bucks. If I'd carved that, I'd probably figured about $5 an hour. So sometimes better. This piece is about $19. And so I'm going to probably just use this smaller one. Got a little bit oversized there. We'll see. Haven't still decided, and it's kind of what looks best in your eye if you're doing it for yourself. I guess if you're doing it for a customer, then you probably ought to stick to reproduction designs and get exact measurements. Okay, as far as the layout, I took some photos from above, got up on a step stool with the pieces together, took them upstairs and had my wife decide the bigger or the smaller of these two, and she decided the upper one, and that's good enough for me. This is, again, not a piece of fine furniture. This is going to go on the top of a doorway, so I'm not getting overly obsessed with it. I would have liked to have something probably in between these two pieces. For the next part of the setup, for drawing the scroll board, what I did was I took a right angle here and placed it on the edge of the board, and it just happened to reach and lined it up here. Then I drew a line from the top edge, which measures from here to here. And if you're new to carpentry, you might find that it's easier to take a piece of paper like this, draw the line right there for how long it is. To find the center point, just fold it over like that and put a little line in the crease. And so that's what I'm going to do to line up, get the midline here, which eventually will be important when I'm making the form. Though I've already decided when I route this, I want to go past the edge a little bit, because at the edge you can kind of roll over and cause problems. So I'll route it first, and then for the template, and then I'll slice it long ways afterwards. But to find the midpoint and where to slice it, I'm going ahead and marking that by just folding the piece of paper in half, finding the center point there, instead of trying to do a lot of measurements and divisions and whatnot. I'm sure there's more than one way to find a center point, but I've always found that a piece of paper works good enough for that. Well, I figured that when I measured the piece of gooseneck molding, or swanneck molding, whatever you want to call it, I'd actually used the width 1 3/4 instead of the actual height 2 1/4. So I'm going to have to redraw my curve here. What I found when I'm getting ready to redraw the curve a little bit wider was that I could actually just do this with one clamp setup, 2 clamps, 1 clamp setup on one end down at the bottom, and just use my hand without any other clamps to mark it on the line here. And in my other free hand, I'll just draw the curve without the use of any more clamps or any poles to distort it. It seems like this bendable piece, which is about 2 millimeters thick, will actually work quite well without any other clamping. I've cut this down to size on the template for the scroll board, and I'm going to do a bunch of relief cuts through here to get ready before I scroll saw it close to the line. I was trying to line up my bandsaw, and I noticed that I can adjust left and right by getting up under it on these knobs right here, but I can't seem to find a way in the manual to adjust the back of the scroll saw. It's pretty close, but it's a little bit off at the top. So I'll have to research that further and how to do that, but I don't see it in the manual. I'm getting ready to make the bandsaw cuts And one thing you might notice is I've got this little metal guard. When I put some riser blocks on here, one time I leaned forward, and thank God I had on the face mask, because I started to see little pieces of black plastic come down onto the table. And it was because I'd actually leaned my forehead into this part of the blade that was not covered once I put the riser blocks in. So now I just built a little cover, put it on there, and I still always wear my face guard for this. Earlier I had made some relief cuts with the miter saw and with the table saw here, miter saw. And when I cut it down to size, I just figured some of the straighter lines, even this first part of the line, I used the table saw to get very straight. I figure I can do a lot better job. Though it looks like I've still, yeah, I went up to about here on the table saw, just cutting right on the line. And then I'm gonna have to bandsaw and sand that down, but I put some X's on here so I don't cut out the wrong thing when I'm going around to where the rosette's gonna go, and done some relief cuts on the bandsaw here. But this nice little wedge I formed with the miter saw earlier by just setting it at, I don't know, maybe 20 degrees and cutting through there, gave me enough room where I could get my bandsaw in and do some relief cuts here. I've been using an oscillating sander here to work on the curve, and I'm getting it close to the line, the upper line. I actually redrew a second line. I'm getting close to the line. I scrolled sawed it, and I was able to get enough relief cuts that I could get around the circle without hitting the end on the bandsaw. It took a little chipping away, my method, but eventually I'm going to end up changing this to a spindle sander and doing the inside, and then I'll start hand sanding to get it nice and smooth with a flexible strip and a piece of sandpaper. The next step will be to join two boards together, because my pediment scroll board is about 13.5 inches and I don't have a board wide enough for that. Now, if you're going to make this for a family heirloom, a Queen Anne highboy bonnet top, then I would go to the source where you can find a board wide enough, 14-inch board, and do the scroll board out of one. Now, if you watch the New Yankee Workshop, Norm actually took two boards to make his scroll board here, and his seam was actually showing. Some people say if it's just the very top, you can cover it with the gooseneck molding. But I saw that on his video, the gooseneck molding didn't come down and cover the entire area, and you'll see there's a seam showing between the two boards right here. He used a very light stain on his project, so it was still showing after the stain. I'm using a very dark stain, extremely dark, to be able to match the fireplace that was built earlier, and therefore I think I can get away with joining two boards. Plus, this is just the top of a door frame, and I might even put the seam down at the bottom here, because you'll be looking up and it's quite high where this is placed.
so it might be even hard to see that seam, especially with the dark stain. But I'm going to, the next project, show how to join these two boards, glue them together without having to use a joiner. We'll just do it on the table saw. There's a method where the blade, even if it's off a little bit, it'll still correct for the two sides to match for the glue up. Just a tip for planing for the early woodworkers is to grab the end of the board when you're planing and lean it up to bring it up to decrease the snipe. On the infeed and on the outfeed table, same thing. Toward the end of the cut, you would take and grab this end down here and bring this up higher to decrease the snipe. And always be sure to use your pencil lines to be able to tell what you've already removed wood-wise and what you haven't removed. So the concept for joining these two boards together to make one wider board is that I'm going to put a brace across the top, this piece of MDF across the top, and then cut right between the seam here, this seam right here, and put the blade slightly higher than the two boards, but below the top edge of that, so I don't cut all the way through the board. I'm using some double stick turner's tape. This comes in both a wider and a narrow. I use the narrow so it'll be easier to pull the board off. I actually ran a little bit longer than the board, so maybe help peel it off. So basically I placed 3 of these. I probably could have got away with just 2 of them, but I placed 3 of them along the edge here and put a lot of downward pressure on it. First I got to take the back of the tape off. So here's the setup at the table saw to join these two pieces of wood, and I've made sure that I've kept the blade above the two boards but below the bracing board. That way, if my blade's a little bit tilted one way or the other, the two sides will still match up because they're going to meet on the glue up. Now you can take that to the joiner and get it exactly 90 degrees on each side too. And yes, I use a digital gauge and I get it to 90 or 90.1 degrees, but even that sometimes is not accurate enough. So I'm going to run right down the seam with the table saw, and then these two pieces will meet. They'll mate together. Should be perfectly mated when that blade cuts through with the cross bracing without having to take it to a joiner and messing with it. So here it is after the cut, and you can get a better idea. Probably should have started here where the blade goes up above the two boards. Now those surfaces should meet exactly. I did watch the blade cut the whole way through to be sure that it didn't veer off toward the end of the board or anything, and it did stay in the line and cut both sides of the boards, so it should be good for glue up now. Now I'm getting ready for the glue up between the two pieces here to make a board wide enough for the scroll board. And when you're doing that, make sure you put the triangles on. I did flip this board over one time when I was setting up the clamps just now and putting the tape on so the glue doesn't get on my clamp right at the seam there. I flipped it over upside down and then noticed that, hey, this wouldn't have been the right two sides to put together because I didn't see the triangle here, but I'd already put that on ahead of time, on one on each end. And so then I'll get ready for the glue up now. I'm gonna glue the edges together. If I was doing a structural piece or maybe even an heirloom piece, I might put some small mortise tenon joints here with the Festool domino, but I understand that it's actually very strong. You've got ingrained glue up here, so it should be a very strong joint. And this is not a family heirloom. Again, it is above a doorway. It's not structural. It's not going to have a lot of weight on it. Again, if it were structural, something that was going to be bearing a lot of weight on top of it, then I would consider mortise tenon joinery to keep it both aligned and for strength. But again, ingrained glue should be pretty good. And I'll probably have some glue blocks behind it at some point during the construction that'll bridge across there behind it. That'll actually help hold it too. Okay, so doing the glue up of the two boards to make one wider board.
I just clamped the ends here to get them kind of the surface close together on each end, and just ran one caul across it. It's not a convex caul like they say to cut one or buy one. I guess you can make your own pretty easy with a slight little curve to push down in the middle, but it's just a straight piece of board. But it's pretty close, and I did get glue squeeze out all along the line here, and so I tried to alternate the clamps as much as possible, and probably maybe another caul down at the other end would have been fine, but this board is really thick enough where I can actually plane a fair amount off the top. Well, it's not going to fit in the planer because it's a little too wide, but I have a drum sander that it will fit in if I need to, or even break out the hand plane, which I would hate to do. For this project, I think the drum sander will probably work fine if it's a little bit off on the edge there, but it's going to be pretty close. I can tell the edges are pretty tight, and I've got a decent squeeze out of glue along here. Excuse the audio as I have a dust mask on, and I'm getting ready to start sanding around the curve here, getting real close to the line as possible. Just kind of an example. I'm going to take my hand off the camera and go ahead and complete getting really close to the line, then I'll sand it down with a flexible sander after that by hand sanding. So I used the oscillating sander with the biggest roll, and then I used the smallest roll to get up close to the corners and a little bit into the areas where the big roll couldn't get. Getting close to the line, trying not to pass it. That's why it's very important to put really dark lines on your template. Now I'm going to switch to a rasp, and I'm going to start hand rasping, getting close to the line as I can, and then I'll go to sandpaper to do the final smoothing. Okay, I've finished the rasping. I noticed that the difficult area was right in here, so I used rasp to get in tight as I can. Now I'm getting ready to do some sanding. I'm going to use a piece of this notebook that's been cut out to make a flexible piece that I can form, put some sandpaper underneath, and then kind of follow my curve down and along the sides and along the inside. I have some thin wood too, but I think the plastic's a little bit more resilient and less likely to crack. So I'll put a piece of sandpaper on there like this, and then just kind of follow it down and try to get down close to my line. So right now I'm still letting my two boards that I'm joining for my scroll board to dry in clamping time. I'm already an hour past the recommended clamping time. I'm going to burnish my card scrapers to remove the glue from the glue line. I've got about 3 of them laid out here. First thing I'm going to do is just going to take them and just flatten them kind of on some sandpaper. I think 300 grit's recommended. I use 100 grit. I figure it's fine if I get it a little bit rough. And so I flatten all the sides there. Then the next step I'm going to take, and I've got a board, if you can see the end of it like that. I'll set my file in there. I've already kind of taken a burnisher and flattened off the old burrs from this. But I'm going to take my board and put this file in here so I can get about 90 degrees and put a little oil on there, and then I'm going to kind of bring it along there to get my edge back flat, so not just one little piece. If the card scraper is a little curved, maybe just one little piece is catching the board, but I don't want to get the whole length of it catching. So I'm going to take and put it, that helps me get it 90 degrees. There's other methods. People use belt sanders and put a block of wood behind it upright with a belt sander. Don't turn the belt sander on and just move around the belt sanding. That way it keeps it 90 degrees. But I'm going to do this on all 4 sides before I burnish it. Got my burnisher ready. Anything harder than the steel is fine. People say screwdrivers, and some people say screwdrivers too soft for a burnisher, but I have actually burnished with a screwdriver and it has worked. I was up in the woods in Canada, out on an island that was an hour and a half by boat, no roads, and used a screwdriver for a burnisher for a card scraper. I was doing some carpentry for my brother's cabin. So I think this method will work. It puts a nice hook on it, and again, this is a little block I made. There's another block I've got here that it's not cut all the way down to the end. It's got a slice in here to kind of hold the card, for burnishing, and I'll use that later when I'm kind of got it a little bit smaller than the scraper, and I'll burnish along the sides here. Okay, so I'm back. I took this over to the bench vise, and I took and put my piece in here and flattened all four sides. First I started on the sandpaper, first I burnished the ends to get all the old burrs off. Then I took it over to sandpaper and polished it a little bit more. Then I got the sides square. Next thing I'm gonna do is kind of stretch out the metal here. Took a little bit of tool oil. It's actually air tool oil. Put a few drops on the paper towel there. Take my burnisher, get a little bit of air tool oil on the burnisher. Then I'm going to set it back. There's different measurements I've heard on how far you set this back from the edge. And then I'm going to kind of go at maybe a 45-degree angle and start drawing out that metal, thinning it out a little bit so I can turn over a burr later. Okay, I'm back. I took this over to the bench already and ran the edges and got them flat. When I was talking about drawing out the edge along here with the burnisher to make it thinner to turn over, I realized I don't know what the heck I'm talking about. So it might not even be the right step, but it's worked for me in the past. And I'm just a weekend hobbyist. I'm not the brightest guy in the world either. Here's the old, well, it's not an old joke, I just made it up. My mind is not the sharpest tool in the workshop. It's the second sharpest tool. You want to know what's the sharpest? Everything else. You can apply that to a lot of situations. One time I told the tennis pro on Hilton Head Island he was the second best on the island. He asked me who's best, and I told him everybody else. Probably don't want to tell your boss that one though. But it can be applied to just about anything in life. So I don't really know that much about card scraping, and I know there's a bunch of different ways to do it, and I know that people that are really good, they do the gooseneck rounded scrapers. But I'll get good results. I usually do. I just don't do it very often, so I have to brush up on it every now and then. Okay, so I'm here about to burnish the card scraper, and gonna start out at about 90 and then just tilt it a little bit down, maybe 10-20 degrees. I think if you go too far down, you'll roll that edge over and it'll be a nice sharp hook, but it won't last. If you get too skinny of a little hook coming over the edge there, it's not going to last very long. I think if you just do a slight tilt down, that you have a little thicker metal there, and it will probably last longer. So here we go. 1, 2, 3, put an extra one in there, 4. Now I'm going to do the other side so I can have a double hook on there. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so I'm back with the card scraper. It now has a little hook or a burr on it, and I'm gonna try it out and give it I've had better burrs I can feel in the past. Seems like when you first get these card scrapers, they're really thick metal on the ends, and they don't form as good a burr. After you've used them for a while, it kind of thins out that metal on the edges, I think, from all the burnishing, and then they tend to turn a little bit easier hook on them. So don't be discouraged if when you first start to get them, they're not making that good a burr on them. So anyway, let's give it a try here and see how the shavings are. Right along that glue line, though eventually I am going to run it through a drum sander too. I want to get some of the glue off. Okay, I've drawn my pattern on the scroll board, the two boards that were glued together earlier, I kind of got marked off my waist at the very end and then just bisected that line down the middle, put my template on one side and just flipped it over and put it on the other side. I won't have to be right on the line. In fact, I'll cut out further now that I'm going to have a router template than I did on my original template. Original one I didn't want to have to sand too much, so I got closer to the line. On this one the router will take it off, so I probably won't even need the drum sander. I'll just end up doing some hand sanding. So I'm going to draw a second line right outside this first line because I just like to have an extra line to use to bandsaw. Since I'm not going to go right on the line, I'm going to kind of do a line right outside it, and that'll give me a path to follow when I'm bandsawing it. Okay, I'm getting ready to bandsaw the outer curve, and I did some relief cuts with my miter saw. It's a good thing I had this second outer line that I drew just as a guide for the bandsawing, because that let me know how close to get with my relief cuts on the miter saw. So I didn't do any relief cuts down on this end because I'm going to try to save this board for future use, this part of the board, instead of cutting down to the curve like I would normally do between here and here. But I want to save that piece of lumber. So I've got my double lines on here, just kind of hand drew one on there to bandsaw outside, and then I'll route down off the template to the final line there by using the router template, but just to bandsaw roughly outside that. Well, people never really show you the mistakes on those home shows, like Norm's crew in those. But I dropped this board right when I was getting ready to put it up on the bandsaw. It's a pretty heavy, long board. And when it hit the floor, it cracked right from one of these relief lines I'd cut all the way along. It did not crack on the glue line between the two boards, which is down in this area. Actually down in this area. But it split the board, and so it's going to be back to square one, which is going to be another trip to the lumber yard. I'm beginning to wonder if I should have made these relief cuts, but I suppose when you bandsaw it, it's still going to make it weak in this area, where if you dropped it, it would split. So I guess the moral of this is keep good hold on your wood. Even if it's a long, heavy piece, it's hard to get up on the small little table of a bandsaw. I think I'll use some rollers to even with the table next time to help me kind of balance it on that. But so it split when it hit the floor, and I'm going to start from square one and go back. There was an awful lot of drum sanding. That was the worst part of this, is running that thing through the drum sander to get these two boards to glue together. Next time I will use more cawls across it, and I think I'll make some bowed convex cawls to press down on those two boards to keep them more in alignment, so I won't have to do as much drum sanding next time. I noticed that the side I had the one cawl on, that it was actually, the two boards were much more in alignment than the other side, where I had to actually keep going on the drum sander until I got it down to the even surface. So that happens, you know, accidents happen sometimes. It's it's going to be an expensive one. It's going to cost some pretty money for a wide board and long board like this, but I might try to go with one single board if I can find one wide enough. I think I'm about 13 5/8 inches from top to bottom, so if I can find one there, I'll go with one single board. If it's not too expensive, if it is, I'll just glue two together. Okay, well, I made it back from the lumber yard. It was quite a trip there and back with this huge board, 10.5 feet long and about 14.5 inches wide before I just trimmed it on the table saw. It was very hard to manage, but I'm trying to save as much wood as I can. So this time, instead of trying to get this heavy piece up onto the small bandsaw table, I'm going to actually take a jigsaw and cut out a lot of this wood. That'll save me this wood for later. And I'm also going to cut down this side with the jigsaw and then cut it off, and that leaves me enough. If I do mess up the scroll board, I've got a second piece. So they actually gave me a 14.5 inch wide board, one solid piece. I called ahead of time to make sure they could pull it out. I actually had them plane it on at least one side. I think it was like a $25 charge just to plane it. The other side, maybe they planed it, but it's got a lot of scuff marks on it on the side. So I'm going to try to just debulk some of it by cutting out a large portion with a jigsaw. Then I'll take it to the table saw to get closer to the line, and then I'll route it for the last part. That's the plan, at least. We'll see if it works out. While I was there, of course, I got some extra wood too. I found out that my new SUV can fit 10.5-foot boards instead of just 10-foot boards like my old one to go up to the dash on the inside. Used my old mats to put over the top of the dash, so no scuffing there, and lowered the seat down, and used stretch wrap like Dexter from Showtime. Used stretch wrap. It works real good to hold about 3 boards together. That's what I brought back. Not all this size, of course. The ones on top were smaller for future projects. But I went ahead and stretch wrapped them. You do it front and back, it keeps them from sliding around, and then tied it in really well, and didn't make any sudden stops. Gave myself plenty of car lengths in front of me, because I have busted out a windshield in the past, just one time, with a board that was a little too long. It just has slight pressure against the windshield. It wasn't very wide, but it was just enough to pop it out. Lesson learned. Okay, at this point I've been doing some jigsaw cutting, and I was able to get even closer if I wanted to the line, where I probably don't even have to bandsaw it. Can just use the router to bring it down to the template. The reason I'm cutting this out with the jigsaw ahead of time is I'm saving all this extra space, so I could actually flip this board and do a second template if I had to, or do the back of it, or I'll have a lot of extra board here. I'm going to follow down to the line and come down, and I flipped it over and measured it, and I actually have enough board I could actually do 2 of these, just in case I drop it or something like that. So anyway, one learns from their mistakes. I was taught carpentry by a very precise gentleman, Mr. Ed Layton, and I want to give him a shout out for teaching me everything I know. When he first met me, he said I didn't know which side of the hammer to grab. Taught me how to route, taught me how to use table saws properly, taught me how to deflect the blade with the board to keep bringing it down, just slicing thin sections off until it fit just right. Everything needed to be level, plumb, square, and he taught me the right way, the very precise way, and I really can't thank him enough. He taught me more than probably any teacher I've ever had, and that includes 8 years post-college graduate degrees, so I actually went 8 years after college, and in all that time I had some pretty good professors, but as far as common sense stuff and everyday things, he taught me a little electrical, a little plumbing, a little bit of everything. And so again, I just want to say thanks a lot, Ed. I really appreciate that. Well, I ran this through the drum sander about 100 times, probably, both sides. I've now found my least favorite tool. I swore that this outer end was sitting low for some reason, but I tried to get up under and measure and took some blocks, and then it looked okay. But it might need to be raised up. Just the weight of it on this end, I think, might bring it down a little bit. I know it has to be open. You can't put a support over there because you need to run wider boards, double wide boards through there. But I found my least favorite tool now, and I wouldn't name any names, of course, on what, but if I had to get a wider planer and do it, boy, the planer's so superior to this drum sander. It really makes a good job compared to the drum sander, which seemed to get a lot of snipe, like multiple areas through the board. It took forever to run it through over and over, and flipping it again, maybe it's not quite aligned yet, but boy, if I can stay away from that drum sander, I think I'll go to hand planing before I do that again. Now, just to take a break from after that drum sander, all those runs, just going to do a little angle grinding on a kid's kickstand for a bicycle because it's a little too long from when I bought it. Let's see. I'll bet that's hot, but I don't think I want to touch it. So now I've taken the scroll top to the bandsaw and make some relief cuts here, and then so I can clear the back of the blade. When you get a relief cut, a little piece pops out like that. It'll give you more room to maneuver and curve around the back of the blade. I told you that cutout piece looked like a person, didn't I? There it goes. See, just kind of fell out like that. Well, I bandsawed out the circles of the scroll board, and these are a lot of the chips. I really had to nibble away at it. It's hard to get the angle with these long arms sticking out and hitting the bandsaw frame. Well, so nibbling away, I finally got it. Next I'm going to apply a template on top of it with double stick tape and then route around the template. I tried this new Grizzly drum sander I just got, mainly because I didn't want to keep changing the drum with the rigid back and forth, but it really wasn't aggressive enough. I've got a feeling whatever sandpaper grit was sent with it is really more almost finishing sanding. It really didn't take much wood away at all, so I kind of gave up and figured I'll just use the router. But anyway, if you do get that the Grizzly drum sander, I would recommend probably getting more aggressive sandpaper to put on there. Also, I had a problem with the sandpaper sliding off the top. The washer there was too small, so I had to stick one of the inserts, which I believe is supposed to be for one of the smaller drums back here. But anyway, I stuck that on there because I didn't find a bigger washer to hold down, and the sleeve would come right off the top. But anyway, that's just my 2 cents, but I'm probably going to need to switch out some more aggressive sandpaper. Whatever I've got on the rigid right now is really cutting through stuff. I like the rigid oscillating sander a lot. It's saved me a lot of time, and it can do a lot. Okay, so now I'm getting ready to apply the template. I've decided to do it on a shaper table so I can have better visualization. I definitely want my template on top of the piece so I can see how much to take with each pass. I want the bigger piece on the bottom. Either way, if you did an overhand router, I would still want the piece on the bottom so I can see how much to take on each pass and know how deep I need to go. So I put some double stick tape on here. I kind of avoided the spots where when I pry it off I don't want to pop the wood, so along here and here I figure is the weak spots for the grain where I could pop it. I'm going to have to use a 5-in-1 painter's tool to be able to pop that off afterwards. I've also used the back of the scroll board so when I pop it off I don't leave a lot of dents in it in the wood, or if I do it'll be on the back side of the scroll board. Now how many pieces of tape is always a tough decision if you've never done a project before. I haven't done one this size. I've done this project before, but I really don't remember how much tape I put on there. Too little and you run the risk that it might move a little bit on you. You pushed over too much and it's too hard to pry off. So the double stick Turner's tape is really good for that, and we'll see if this is about the right number or if there's any movement. If there's any movement, I'll try with my hand to push it really hard, and if it seems like there's any movement at all, I may just pry it back off and put more pieces on there. So next I need to choose the right bit for the shaper table, and wouldn't you know it, I really need a bit between these two lengths. Would be the best, but I'll see if I can suck this one down low enough in the table to catch the template. What I'm going to try to do is I'm going to route from below, come up and hit the template here, and I need to catch the full thing, and this one was just a little bit short and this one seems very long. Even with all these router bits, you can never have enough. Just like clamps, I think. These are some caddies I made for the router bits. Just took some foam. Here I got one of the woodworking shows, and it already had pre-cut holes in it. And this is the weak part, is the handle here. Actually held up pretty good because it's pretty strong, but I've got some other caddies where the handle split out. You can put a rod in there, I guess. These are wider boards than my other one. Okay, so I was able to suck down the router bit low enough in the shaper table to catch the bearing along the template. So this is the kind of the setup I'm going to do for this. I thought about putting handles on this template, but there's enough room to either end that I can grab it. I'm pretty sure I can keep my hands way far away from the spinning router bit. If that's a problem, I'll stop again and just attach some handles on the template. Okay, so I've got my pin placed in the table here, and to help me get started on the piece, I'm going to anchor it against the pin right here, and then the router bit I'll cut in. I'm going to start at the end there and start to work my way along the, make sure the router base is hooked down. It's a little wobbly, maybe I ought to shim it. I just set my dust collector close to the edge here, just draped over that area, and we'll see how that works out. Well, I found out my bit was sitting a little bit low, so I just took time to stop, readjust it. Also, there's a few cuts I made where I wasn't anchored against the pin very well, so it just takes a little practice. Haven't done the template routing in a bit, but so far I haven't ruined the bottom piece, so that's good. So I stopped, moved the bit up a little bit higher, and we'll give it another shot here. Okay, so I've done the one side here as far as the template routing. I had to change the pin back and forth once to be able to get around some of the different angles, and had to move my router table around a bit. The tuck points are going to be right in here. I'm going to need to rasp or chisel out a little bit, and right in here I'll need to chisel out a little bit, but I got pretty close with the template router bit, and it actually looks like it's there, but it's right on the. So I'm going to go ahead and switch it over to the other side and route the other side next. Okay, so I've finished the template routing with right near the very end. I got blowout right here. I believe what happened is the pin and the router bit got stuck, wedged, and it took off and just tore that out, that piece. The good news is that rosette's going to be covered up. It's going to have a cylinder on top of it with the rosette on top of that. so that seam will never show. The bad news is it's going to take a while to repair and put a backer piece on there. That is kind of a weak point in the routing, and I probably just should have changed the pin to the opposite side of the table. And I was trying to get through it without changing the pin. That was a mistake. But the rest of it's all routed now. It'll take a little cleanup work along the edges to kind of smooth it out. To repair this piece that blew out, it should look like this one over here. I'm gonna run while the router's set up, I'm gonna run a flush trim bit against the edge here to flatten it out. I'm gonna mark the extent of how far the blowout is, so I make sure I get above that. I put some double stick tape on here, and I'm going to put this board straight and use it as a router guide to shave that off, and then I'll build a new piece and glue it on there. Again, this will be hidden behind the rosettes. Rosette block and rosette carving will be on top of this. Actually be drilling a hole through the center though to attach that. I found out on my scroll board template yesterday that the amount of tape that I put on there and the places I put it was just right. I didn't actually have to use the 5-in-1 painter's tool to pry it off. I was able to pry it off with just my hand, and it didn't move during the routing of the template. So it was about the right amount. You might want to reference that. At least I've got it on picture where I applied it, and the fact that I didn't have to pry it off with 5-in-1 tool is good, because then I don't have to worry about damaging the wood, even though it's the back side here. And didn't break the template, so I just peel it off from the ends. I'm going to use one of these spare ends I've got right here to cut the circle out of, because it's the same width, and I've got plenty of extra here on the ends that I can use to remove and cut the half of the circle here on the scroll board to glue against it.